right, tonight we're going to be looking at Matthew 9. It's Jesus ministers and heals. So on the last part, we talked about the Sermon on the Mount for several ones, and then last week he did some healings. And it's going to continue this week and keep on, kind of building as he goes. So I'm going to go ahead and read the first and second verses. And he entered into a ship and passed over and came into his own city. And behold, they brought to him a man sick of palsy, lying on a bed. And seeing Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer, thy sins shall be forgiven thee. Now, right at the end of last week's lesson, he healed the demonic in the Gadarenes. And he was on the opposite side. They had sailed over on the opposite side of Capernaum. So now it says he passed over, he entered into a ship and passed over and came into his own city. We talked about that back in Matthew 4. It's Capernaum. That's where he resided, okay? He did not have a residence there, but he stayed with Peter and Andrew and stayed out in the wilderness around that Capernaum area, because it was also several places where he would go out and pray at night, things like that. So this is, if you look in Luke and Mark, this is the same paralytic, where Matthew doesn't give us quite as much detail. I'm kind of surprised, but it's this is where he was let down from the ceiling. Okay, they couldn't reach him. The crowds was all around him, and they couldn't reach him, so they went up on the top of the roof and let the paralytic down into Jesus' presence. He was in the house talking and teaching to those people. So they brought the man to him, a man sick of palsy, lying on a bed. And Jesus, seeing their faith, said unto the sick of the palsy, Son, be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee. One of the things we want to see here is the faith of the people that brought him. The man had faith also because he had heard of Jesus, but he couldn't get there. His helpers who brought him there, that's what Jesus noticed, because they say, you don't want to go over here to, hear him. That's a long ways. We don't want to haul you, that way. If he's sick on a bed, it's going to take probably 4 people to carry him any particular way. And I don't know how far they had to carry him. But he saw him, again, the sick of palsy. We don't really know what the palsy was, but he could not move. He couldn't get off his bed. So when he saw him, he saw their faith, and he told them, Be of good cheer, thy sins be forgiven thee. Now, just like anything else, the Pharisees was there. Any gathering that they had of any particular size, they would use, because there was teaching going on. Jesus was there, and the Pharisees wanted to hear what was going on to them, okay, and what he was saying. Now, one of the things that's associated with sickness is sin. All through the Old Testament, that is what was shown. And it proves out off and on a lot in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Jesus later on tells them, when he heals another blind man, he wasn't the sinner. It wasn't his cause. This particular case, he doesn't say that. Okay, like I said, it's short, and Matthew doesn't tell us all the information. But he does realize that he needs his sins forgiven. So he tells them right up front, thy sins are forgiven. Now the crowd, they didn't want to hear any of this. Their Messiah, they wanted somebody to call down fire from heaven and get rid of the Romans. Blast them all back to Rome, and then they would be good. But that's not what he was supposed to do. Later on, he will be doing that. Not in this part, in Revelation, when we we see the revelation of Jesus Christ that John recorded. So we can assume that the paralyzed man had a little faith, or it says little here. He had some faith, but his friends probably had more faith and encouraged him to go on and to try to see him. So Jesus dealt with the first problem first. The first thing he saw was his sin. Okay? Matthew Poole says, because sin is the root from which all our evils come, to show that forgiveness is more important than bodily healing, and to show that the most important thing Jesus came to do was to deal with sin. To show when a man's sins are forgiven, he becomes a son of God. To show the response to faith is the forgiveness of sin, and to begin an important conversation with the scribes and the Pharisees. So that's what he's getting ready to talk about, or talk to. Brother Epperson, you'll read verse 3.
And behold, certain of the scribes said within themselves, this man blasphemes.
Okay. Now they took a little exception to him giving him, saying your sins are forgiven, didn't they? Who did they think would forgive sins? God. Or them.
Yeah.
Because through them, they had to make the sacrifices, they had to go do all this, and they had to do that. And here's this guy saying your sins are forgiven, and he hadn't even done anything. That upsets their apple cart quite a bit. So he's telling them that this man blasphemes. It says the scribes correctly understood that Jesus claimed to do something that only God could do. But they were incorrect in assuming that Jesus was not God himself, and that Jesus blasphemed by considering himself God. Here the teachers of the law in their consultation expanded blasphemy to include Jesus' claims to do something only God could do. So he wasn't blaspheming God, even in their minds, but they've expanded that role, that definition. So here on the fly, they kind of like, okay, he's doing this, and we can't really, say anything except this. They don't accept it, so they're starting to, talk back to him, and then he answers them. Verse 4, Iris.
And Jesus, knowing their thoughts, said, wherefore think ye evil in your hearts? For whether it is easier to say, thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, arise and walk.
They had some problems themselves, didn't they? They wanted to still kind of hold the monopoly on the sin business. That was their job. Okay? And they had expanded it all down through the time, even from Moses. They had expanded it. But Jesus talked to them and he said, look, what's more important? A man's sin or a physical ailment that a man has? So they had already seen him, we think, from the last week. We saw 2 or 3 healings, and we pretty well know that the Pharisees was following them, the scribes and Pharisees. So they knew that he could heal, and they was going to watch him to see if he would do it again. And Jesus and God is a little peculiar that way. They don't do the same thing twice, usually. The same thing the same way. They do it differently all through the New Testament. It's not the same thing. Even God did that with Moses. First time he told him to speak to the rock, or to hit the rock to get water, and the second time, don't hit the rock. He said, speak to the rock. Well, Moses got a little excited and didn't. That proved to him he couldn't go over into the promised land because of that. So, he's telling them what's easier, to forgive a man of sins or to heal him. Bertha, you want to read 6, 7, and 8?
Okay. But ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. Then said he to the sick of palsy, Arise, take up your bed, and go into thine houses. And he arose and departed to his house. But when the multitude saw it, they marveled and glorified God, which had given such power unto them.
Okay. So that didn't faze Jesus that much, because he knew their hearts again. But he told them, arise, told the palsy, sick of palsy, arise, take up thy bed, and go into thy house. He didn't touch him, doesn't say that he touched him. He just told him, get up and go to your house. Take your bed and go. That would prove to everybody, because they saw him as he came in and was let down. He was brought in on a bed, couldn't walk, and that proved to everybody that this guy was not able to help himself. And then he gets up and carries his bed out. So everybody was amazed. It said the multitudes, they marveled and glorified God. But the Pharisees, they start planning and negotiating here amongst themselves.
I love that word, said, which has given such power unto men. They see Jesus as a man.
Right.
That you know, in his, well, they see the deity in his performing the miracles, but at the same time, he standing in front of them just like a man.
Right. And the first part of that, it goes back, is when he tells them, okay, the Son of Man. That gets the Pharisees all upset too. Because when he did that, he's claiming to be the Son of God. Said he answered his own question before the religious leaders did. Since he could make good on his claim to heal the man, it gave proof of his claim. He also had authority to vanquish or forgive sins. So the man got up and he went to his house, and he had to, said he didn't go to the temple. Last time, the leper, last week, he told him to go show yourselves to the priests and get clean. But he went home to his house where his people, his family, would see him. We move on to Matthew 9 and 9. Janet, you want to read that for us?
As Jesus passed forward from thence, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the receipt of custom, and he said unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him.
So here is the call of one of the disciples, and of course, since Matthew is writing this, he's going to recognize himself, because it was him, and he can write his attitudes, things that he saw, everything that he did. And he doesn't do all of that right here, but he does as he goes and continues to record what Jesus had done. But he was in his tax booth, says, where he's sitting at the receipt of custom, and Jesus told him to follow me. Now, one of the things that I didn't know, this first one, his name was also Levi. We've talked about that before. In the Bible, several of them had two names, just like most of us have two names, two given names. And his was Levi. And we read in Matthew 2, or Mark 2 and 14, it says, Levi, the son of Alphaeus. In Matthew, we haven't read it yet, but next week we'll read Matthew 10 and 3. There's another son of Alphaeus, James, which is called James the Less. Now they say that they may have been brothers. It's possible. Alphaeus may, a small town like Capernaum, there could have been another Alphaeus there, but it's interesting to think that, Matthew may have had a brother also that was in there. in the 12 disciples. Because we have James, which was James and John, and then we had a second James that they called James the Less, we talked about. We visited about the tax collectors, the tax officers. The Jewish people thought of them as traitors because they had to force the Roman soldiers behind them to make people pay taxes. That's why in the Chosen, we saw a Roman soldier there by Matthew. He had to be protected, and then if they didn't pay, he said, okay, go get them and take them off. In one of the little previews, I don't know if you've seen it or captured it, in that Matthew told the guards to go get his dad because he was behind payments. And that really got things going between them, for one thing. But that's they viewed them as extortioners because they were allowed to keep whatever they over collected. So a tax collector bid for the contract to become tax collector. So if they needed 20%, whatever Rome needed, if they needed 20%, if they could collect 25%, and the people don't throw too much of a fit, that's what he gets. And he probably did it to the richer people. He probably got more money from them because they wouldn't throw such a fit. And the lesser people, he may not have gone as much. I don't know exactly. But he was busy taking from the people for Rome and for himself. When Jesus called him, then he became giving. He became understanding what it was, and he had to learn all through his ministry, his discipleship with Jesus, what it was to learn to give. It says, when a Jew entered into the customs service, which is the tax part, he was regarded as an outcast from society. He was disqualified to be a judge or a witness in a court session. He was excommunicated from the synagogue, and in the eyes of the community, his disgrace extended to his family. So now we realize a little bit what was happening in the show, why everybody hated Matthew. He didn't want to go. He got the guy in the ox cart to take him across town because he didn't want to get pelted and all this stuff. We see how hated that he was. Said a faithful publican or tax collector was so rare that Rome itself, that one Sabinus, for his honest managing of that office in an honorable remembrance thereof, had certain images erected with this superscription. I don't know what that word is. For the honest publican, what was on the offering. So that, to me, there's not too many of them. It's telling you. There was only a few that was honest tax collectors. So he said, as he said to some of the other disciples, follow me. He wanted to show, so far he'd gathered mainly fishermen, and we'd seen some of the others that had come about. Now, what we would say is almost the dregs of society. He was getting his team together from the lowest of the low almost. 10 through 13, you want to read that for us, Harold?
And it came to pass, as Jesus sat at meat in the house, behold, many publicans and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said unto his disciples, why eateth your master with publicans and sinners? But when Jesus heard that, he said unto them, they that be whole need not a physician, but they that are sick. But go ye and learn what that meaneth. I will have mercy and not sacrifice, for I am not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance.
They were just not kind of understanding what he was trying to do. So it sounds like he may have gone back to Matthew's house, and he called his friends together. Okay? Because they found him. It says the Pharisees found him, saw it, with his disciples there, and they were having, and they're just, what in the world, what are you doing? You're eating with, somebody that's outcast. They can't come into the synagogue. We don't recognize them as Jewish people anymore.
Remember, the priest, they couldn't hang around unclean people at all.
That's right. That's right.
Especially if someone was thought to be unclean, they had to avoid them.
They had to go around. So, it's kind of like they followed him. They were following after see what he was going to do next. It's what I see what they had, what he was doing. Jesus aims at a mission among the reprobated classes, and his first step is the call of Matthew to discipleship, and the second, the gathering together through him of a large class of a number of these classes to social entertainment. Now, there were other tax collectors around and other people that Matthew knew that, so the publicans and the sinners, the publicans as the tax collectors and other, quote, sinners that the Pharisees dubbed as sinners, because how come? They couldn't come to the tabernacle, they couldn't come to the synagogue, they couldn't come or didn't come regularly. They may have not have brought the offerings that they thought. We get into society very, very easily if we're not careful. And it's kind of like when Jesus went down and watched what everybody put in the offering plate. We do that a lot. We may see something, I'm going to give more than everybody else, just to be a name. Or I'm going to go do this just to be my name. Jesus went down to see, when he viewed the widow giving the mites in, to see who was giving from the heart. It's also like when he told them to pray, pray in secret. Don't pray out like the Pharisees do. Don't do it to be seen. Do it from the heart. He's still pushing that these people need me. And that's what he says in this last part. The people that are not sick don't need me. It's the ones that are sick and the sinners. They need me. Goes back and kind of Hosea tells it in one place, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Again, Jesus was not trying to upset the law, but he's trying to show them the difference between the law and the heart. Again, it happened another time, I think it was Saul's. It's better to obey than to have sacrifice. Saul, when he went and he told him, go get the Amalekites and slay them all, slay their animals, slay everything, and come back. And he did, and he had a bunch of sheep with him, and a bunch of cattle, and maybe even some of the people. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and reread the story. But the prophet said, he said, this is a glorious day, says Saul did, as he comes back, because God's been with us. The prophet said, well, what is this bleating I hear in my ears? What's going, no, you haven't done what God told you to do. That's what Jesus was trying to tell them here. It's more important that you obey him to do what he asks. Verse 14, then came to him the disciples of John, saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast oft, but thy disciples fast not? So he's talking about the time they go through. It does say here, the bottom part of this. Well, I read it somewhere. That they fasted at least twice a week. The Pharisees did. Is that what it says?
Page 8.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, the bottom. They were known for often they would fast twice a week. So the people, as they were seeing that were following them, and John's disciples was doing that. They were fasting. So that's what John's disciples wanted to know. Why are your disciples not fasting as they're going to, as they should be? 15, 16, and 17, Brother Everson.
And Jesus said unto them, Can the children of the bride chamber move as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the day will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast. No man putteth a piece of new cloth into a garment, for that which is put in fill it taketh from the garment, and the rent is made worse. Neither do men put a new wine into old bottles, else the bottle break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish. But they put new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved.
So this is, it's referencing, Jesus is referencing a wedding. And he's telling them, can the friends of the bridegroom mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? And so he's trying to tell them, while I am here on earth, they need to absorb everything that I'm giving them. There will come a time when I'm not here. And then they will fast. They will seek the will of the Father as they've been shown. But right now, they are trying to learn as much as they can from it. And then he goes and tells about the new cloth and the old cloth, that you don't patch something old with something new. And the wine, you don't put old wine or new wine into old bottles, because as the fermentation happens, you get expansion, and that'll burst the bottles or the wine sacks or whatever they have. I like what John Trapp says down there about midway at the bottom. The old Puritan commentator John Trapp drew 3 points from this. Fasting is not abolished with the ceremonial law, but still to be used as a duty of the gospel. That times of heaviness are times of humiliation, and that our halcyons here are but as a marriage feast, for continuance they last not long. Basically what it's saying is, the short time that we have that we're without him will be rewarded later. Okay? It does say, and it is true, there's kind of a dark note in the word, the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. So he is the bridegroom of the church. And I like it, the next page says the illustration of the wineskin. Jesus explained that he did not come to repair or reform the old institution of Judaism, but to institute a new covenant altogether. The new covenant doesn't just improve the old, it replaces it and goes beyond it. Okay? I like that. It says Jesus' reference to the wineskin was his announcement that the present institution of Judaism could not and would not contain his new wine. He would form a new institution, the church, that would bring Jew and Gentile together into a new complete body. Now that's kind of, I've not thought of it that way, but that's exactly what he was doing. Because Paul goes on later and expounds upon that. Because of the rejection by the Jews, the Gentiles took off. Now there was Jews in there that accepted this, but it's to go forward with it. It's going to be out to the Gentile people too, and it's going to be, quote, the church. It's going to be what he's trying to build.
You know, when he said, okay, what happens is when the fermentation takes place, new, okay, material, usually the skin, it expands.
It can expand. It can.
But then it expands as far as it can.
Right.
And then it dries out.
Right.
And the fermentation is complete. Okay. So if they were to open it up and put more new wine back in it, there would be no place for it to expand.
Right.
I don't, maybe this is all wet, but the priest, they were not willing to get new wineskins.
That's right.
They were expanded as far as they could go, but they were not willing to accept the new wineskin, the new covenant.
What he was bringing in, that's right. And that's why they couldn't, it just upset their apple cart to no end. That they couldn't, it just really, you know, they've been doing this since Moses. Of course, they changed it along the way. But who are you to change what, you know, we've been doing for 1,000 years? More than 1,000 years. That's kind of what they were, you know, asking him. And that's what he's telling them, that there are some things that you've got to learn to change.
Since I've gotten older, I look back and I remember, okay, I've been around the church now for 50-something years, okay, the Church of God. And I look back at some of the old timers that were then, and sometimes I know they will look at some of us young guys and look and say, them young whippersnappers, you know, only if they could, you know, but now, if I'm not careful,
You get in the same mode.
I get in the same mode. I look back at those young guys and say, oh, those young whippersnappers, you know, they haven't been through what I've been through. They haven't done this, they haven't done that.
Right.
No, they might not have it, but they're on God's program just as much as I'm part of God's program. And we have to accept it. And I'm not talking about doctrine, I'm talking about just the way sometimes people do things.
I went to visit someone here not very long ago, and I don't know what particular time they were talking about, but they were, it said that I came into church service, and it was when I was a kid, somewhat, and it's the first time she'd ever seen anybody wearing tennis shoes to church. And I'm like, I wore tennis shoes all the time when I was a kid. I don't know when that happened, but anyway, it was funny that some of the things that people remember and see because we're outside of it. You know, someone new coming in that's different than us. You know, a lot of people, we don't want them. They're different. They don't want to be, you know, they're not going to fit in with us. Well, that's not the way it should be. We have to absorb them and love them like God wants to. We have to be very careful and walk the road and be in communication with God and the things, how we deal with people. Because a lot of times we want to slap them upside the head and say, okay, you're in my seat, get out of my seat, and you know, you got to change your clothes and you got to do this and you got to do that before you come in here. They don't want to hear that. They want, first of all, we have to understand God will take care of whatever problems they have. We have to be patient, and we don't want to be patient because we don't want to look at our faults. We have faults, but we don't, everybody accepts our faults, you know. Anyway, I better get on. Let's see. Iris, did you read that, or are you next? Okay. 18 and 19, Iris.
While he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler and worshipped him, saying, My daughter is even now dead, but come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. And Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples.
Okay. So while he was in the midst of this dealing with the Pharisees, he had a ruler came and worshipped him. Now, it doesn't say anything else, and you can go look in the other versions. It's a little, different, but he's already told him, in this particular instance, she's already dead. But my daughter is even now dead. Come and lay a hand upon her, and she shall live. We could see his faith. That he had already, up until this time, we don't know that he healed anybody from death. But he had healed the blind, he had the leper, and all these things. So he is indicating the faith that he has. So Jesus did, because he followed him, and so does his disciples. Now that was Matthew's take. On the others, gives a little better detail. Again, Mark and Luke tells us that he was delayed. He gets ready while he's making his way to there. She wasn't already dead, but she was near death. And she was coming, as we're coming there, he gets delayed. And because of that, the girl passes. But Jesus will deal with that in just a minute. So he hears that and he gets ready and starts down the journey. Okay, Bertha, 20, 21, and 22.
And the older woman, which was diseased with the issue of blood 12 years, came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. For she said within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole. But Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. And the woman was made whole of that hour.
Okay. You can go back and read Mark 5:21 through 43 and 8, and Luke 8:43 through 48, and get a little bit more context with this. But the woman was pressed. She had tried to see all the physicians. She had basically spent all of her living, all of her money, trying to get healed, and she hadn't. And she had heard about Jesus and was wanting him. In her mind, she didn't even have to ask him what to do. If she could just touch his hem, the hem of his garment. Now in the Chosen it shows, and when we went over to Israel, we saw they have I don't know, it's a hoodie, but it's a kind of a sheet thing that goes up over them, usually white, and each four corners of that, they have a little tassel that hangs down. That may have been, or just his robe, that part of the robe that he was wearing, that may have been what she touched. If she could just reach out and touch him, she had that faith that she could be healed. And Jesus, when he felt that, and the other verse said he felt virtue go out of him. He wasn't even paying attention. He didn't even, there's a crowd around him. He's trying to make his way to this girl's house, and the lady just touched him. The woman touched him, and because of that, she felt it, and he felt it go out of him, and knew that she was healed. And he tells her here, Daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. So we can see that it's not only the faith of the people, but it's the faith of the people around us too at the time, because the one paralytic earlier, they had faith. Everything. We see that was what was looking into Jesus, trying to tell us that's what we need, from him. We need to have faith in him and who he was.
And she was desperate too.
She had wasted everything, as far as she had not wasted, but she tried everything she could, spent everything she had.
I mean, there's a message that I need to get desperate. You know what I mean? Sometimes we just, Lord, when we get there,
Right.
I know you can do it. You will do it.
Yeah. So
I like the fact that there's bound to have been other people rushing up against Jesus in the crowd.
Exactly.
She was the only one that had faith that he was going to take care of her right there.
Right.
And when I look at that, when we are praying for an individual for healing and one thing or another. A lot of times, if it's affecting us, it's harder for us to have that faith.
Right.
Shouldn't be, but I mean,
Right.
even Paul couldn't pray good enough to get healed. The Lord told him His grace was sufficient.
Right.
So when we gather around someone praying, all it takes is one in that to have that faith, to touch upon that and get the healing.
It says in here, about halfway down in 12, or the top part, it says, to the best of our knowledge, there's no promise or pattern that touching the garment of Jesus would bring healing. It seems that the woman believed this in a somewhat superstitious way, yet even though her faith had elements of error and superstition, she believed in the healing power of Jesus, and his garment served as a point of contact for that faith. There are many things that we find wrong with this woman's faith, yet her faith was in Jesus. And the object of faith is much more important than the quality or the quantity of faith. Jesus told us that before. If you have a faith as this tiny mustard seed, you tell this mountain to get out of here and it will. That's what she had. She had that faith. 12 years. She was, again, unclean. She couldn't really get up against people or anything like that, but yet she pressed on to make sure she could and to get her healing. Because, like I said, she's desperate. This is the last thing that she knew to do. 23, 24, 25, 26. You want to read that for us next, Janet?
And when Jesus came into the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, he said to them, give place, for the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. But when the people were put forth, he went in and took her by the hand, and the maid arose.
And 26, and the fame.
And the fame hereof went abroad into all that land.
So, this particular case, Matthew doesn't record, keep it quiet or anything like that. But this is the first time that we see someone was raised from the dead. She was dead. The mourners are already there. And it says they would hire professional mourners, even for the poorest families. And that Mishnah, Ketubah 4 and 4, is part of the Jewish, not Bible, but it's part of their sayings. In that sayings, it says that a mourner should have somebody for a mourner, not less than 2 flutes and 1 wailing woman. So they're going to have at least 3 people. The poorest person needs to have at least that many. I don't have any clue why, but that's...
My mom, she got about 85. She started saying, all my friends are dead,
Yeah.
Nobody gonna come to my funeral.
Yeah.
Margie said, I will, or a bunch more.
Bunch of mourners to get there. Yeah. So we need to understand in this particular that he did put out the crowd. The ones that were making scorn of him or making fun of him, he told them to get out. Here again, in the other books, he tells them to get out. They don't need to be there because their faith is not there. Their faith is in that she's dead. They didn't have any faith. But then he actually went ahead and touched her, took her by the hand, and told her to arise. And in the other one, it's Tabitha, which is a little girl, rise up. And then it also tells us he gave her something to eat because she had been dead for a little while. Let's see. Harold, is it your turn?
Yes.
27 to 31.
And when Jesus departed thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou son of David, have mercy on us. And when he was coming to the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus saith unto him, Believe ye that I am able to do this? They said unto him, Yea, Lord. Then touched he their eyes, saying, According to your faith, be it unto you. And their eyes were opened, and Jesus straightly charged them, saying, See that no man know it. But they, when they were departed, spread abroad his fame in all the country.
It's just hard to keep something secret when, they were blind. And it's two blind men.
It was a miracle.
Of course it was a miracle. Yeah. And
Hey, little Joe, he's seeing today, man, what's happening?
They were, it's hard to describe. They could hear the people, knew something was going on, and they could hear Jesus had done something and was following that crowd, but they really didn't know where he was at. So it says that they were crying and saying unto him as they followed him. They recognized him as the son of David. They recognized him, his lineage, to have mercy on us. Now, they didn't ask to be healed, did they? Directly. Not Matthew's version. But in this one they did, and he said, the blind man came to him, Jesus saith unto him, Believe ye that I am able to do this? Yep, I believe you are. Then he touched their eyes, again doing it differently, saying, According to your faith be it unto you. Boy, that particular time, it's like, boy, I hope both of them get healed, If their faith, one's faith is good, one faith's not. But it was. And he told them, says their eyes were opened. Now they had open eyes, but their eyes became where they could see. Jesus charged them straightly, saying, See that no man knoweth. And again, it's hard when you're seeing somebody and you say, Oh, Joe, I didn't know you saw her. Or something like that. Two blind men looking at one another, or whatever it might be. So they understood the Son of David title that they called him was a messianic title also. They knew that it was going to be coming king. And they asked for mercy. No talk about merit, no pleading of their past sufferings, or their persevering endeavors, or their resolves for the future, but had mercy on us. He will never win a blessing from God who demands it as if he had a right to it. That's what Charles Spurgeon says. This is the first time Jesus is called Son of David, and there can be no doubt that the blind men were confessing Jesus as Messiah. Now, before is the Son of Man, and that is a title of Messiah also, but here it's a clear title because there are other. He's a man and he's a son of man, but in that particular case, when they're saying the Son of David, it's meaning that he
Another
is the
divine
Messiah.
revelation.
It was.
Because they didn't know anything what he looked like.
Nope. That Jesus did not deal with the blind men until they were indoors. This may have been to dampen the messianic expectations on the day marked by two highly public and dramatic miracles already. He healed the men in response to their faith. Faith does not guarantee healing for every individual, yet they are undoubtedly multitudes that are not healed because they lack faith. These men simply proclaimed their faith by saying, Yes, Lord. And we see that because sometimes, even in his hometown, he said he couldn't do certain miracles because they didn't believe. The bottom of the page on 15 says, The leper in Matthew 8 showed faith because he absolutely knew that Jesus was able to heal his leprosy. The centurion in chapter 8 had faith, such great faith, that Jesus openly praised it. The disciples failed in faith when the storm came on the Sea of Galilee, and the woman with issue of blood was healed by her faith. So we see it's central to us, that faith is central to us. According to your faith, let it be so to you. says in the middle of page 16, they had the faith to follow Jesus. This meant forsaking other paths, other directions, and deciding to follow him. They had the faith to cry out, willing to put words to their desire. They had the faith to make some noise and to be unafraid of embarrassment. They had faith to identify Jesus as the Son of David, recognizing him as Messiah. They had the faith to ask Jesus for mercy, knowing they didn't deserve healing. They had the faith to believe that Jesus was able to heal them, and they had the faith to say, "Yes, Lord." So despite Jesus' warning, they couldn't resist telling others. Now, I think in my particular opinion, it doesn't really say, but in other, where he's healing the blind men, the Pharisees come after those guys, and they grill him and his parents and everybody else about what happened, when it happened, and all that. So that may have been why he was telling them. We don't know exactly why. Though we do not admire their well-intentioned disobedience, we admire their excitement over the work of God. This was the only area of unbelief. They didn't have the faith to obey Jesus as they should have. We see that, and I've seen a few people like that when Jerry and Chuck got saved and got on fire. I mean, it was just amazing. They're like nothing, mattered. And that's why we should be all the time. But as we go, it just kind of get in a routine.
You talk about that boy left here, couldn't even speak good English. He used all kind, and in a matter of just a couple of years,
Right.
he was able to not only speak Ukrainian, he can be an interpreter.
Yep. Yeah, it's a God thing for sure that happened. 32 through 34. And as they went out, behold, they brought to him a dumb man possessed with the devil. And when the devil was cast out, the dumb man spake, and the multitudes marveled, saying, it was never so seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, he casteth out devils through the prince of devils. So they see this, this devil casted out, and we saw on the previous chapter the other demons cast out. He's saying he can only do this by the prince of devils, that he is the prince of devils casting out. He's in command of these devils. He's the prince of devils, basically. That's what he's telling them. But the Pharisee says he casts out demons by the ruler of demons. And attributing this work of Jesus to the power of Satan, we see in this gospel the Pharisees and other religious leaders continuing their rejection of Jesus and his work. Nothing was too bad for them to say of Jesus. Surely this was going very near to the unpardonable sin. That's Spurgeon. And Carson said, this verse is missing from the Western text, but the external evidence is strong and the verse seems presupposed. Go ahead and read 35 to the rest of it, dear brothers.
And Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every sickness and every disease among the people. But when he saw the multitude, he was moved with compassion on them, because they fainted and were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. Then saith he unto his disciples, the harvest truly is plenteous, but the labors are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, and he will send forth labors into his harvest.
Jesus shows us what happened in Matthew 8 and 9, though mostly it was in and around Capernaum. He did this all over Galilee. And we see this around as he went across the area. It says in the previous verse, Jesus was terribly and unfairly criticized, yet it did not make him stop his work. He didn't say, oh, they are saying terrible things about me, what can I do? Or how can I make them stop? He simply ignored the unfair criticism and went about his Father's business. The word which is used, moved with compassion, is the strongest word for pity in the Greek language. I can't even try to say it. Spalagochinethsis or something like that. It describes the compassion which moves a man to deep things, deep depths of his being. It said it's originally not in the classic Greek. It's not in the Septuagint, which is Latin. The fact is, it was a word coined by the evangelists themselves. They did not find one word in the Greek language that suited their purposes, and therefore they had to make one up. So this word, this compassion, wasn't the amount. It's kind of like empathy. You know, we say a lot of times we have compassion for somebody or we have sympathy for them. They went above and beyond and basically invented a new word to show how Jesus felt to the people, as far as he was so moved by the people seeing all of them bow. And that one where they went through it and showed that he went for several days or several hours in a day healing people, and he was just, when he came to the tent that night, he was just giving out. Because he still was man. He still, could only go so far as a man could go.
He had to be there.
He had to be for us. So, well, I appreciate everybody coming out. We will be going again, Matthew 10, next week. Hopefully it's less than 100 degrees outside by that time.